fifth graders. Welcome to our next lesson in our spirituals journey, spirituals and quilts. And again, you might be saying, quilts, huh? But let's start with spirituals. I just want to review with you that spirituals were songs of anticipated freedom. Spirituals go back hundreds of years. And because we don't know who wrote most of them, except we do know that Harriet Tubman wrote Wade in the Water. Okay. We're not sure exactly when they were written, but we do know that they are hundreds of years old, and they're such an important part of our American history and our American collection of music. So we're going to start today with a song that actually talks about a lot of visual symbols. Now, 2 weeks ago, you were asked to do sort of a self-guided lesson on the spiritual Follow the Drinking Gourd. And I hope most of you did that. We're going to review that today because that ties into what we're talking about. So you have the music. It was posted on that site. And the drinking gourd was, if you remember, basically the drinking ladle that the slaves in the fields used to get water. But if you look up in the sky, there's a constellation that looks like that drinking ladle. It's very easy for just about anybody to spot, called the Big Dipper. And if you follow the cup, the ladle part of the Big Dipper, it points to the brightest star in the sky, which is called the North Star, or its scientific name is Polaris, which is where we get the word polar, like the North Pole. And so the slaves were taught to navigate, to follow that North Star, follow that drinking gourd, because it would keep them on the correct path toward freedom. So just to review, I'm going to do the refrain with you very quickly. Please sing after me. Follow the drinking gourd, the drinking gourd. Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd. For the old man is a-waiting for to carry you to freedom. For the old man is a-waiting for to carry you to freedom. If you follow that drinking gourd, if you follow that drinking gourd. Would you please do that with me one more time together? Ready, and follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd. For the old man is a-waiting for to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. Good. Now the verses of the song talk about a lot of visual symbols, a lot of visual signals. For example, the verse says, when the sun comes back and the first quail calls. Because the slaves worked from sunup to sundown, they would notice when the sun came back for a longer time, and that was in the spring and summer. Then as the days got shorter and the sun left the sky earlier, fall and winter, they would know that's not the time you want to travel. You want to travel in spring and summer because it's warmer. There's no snow on the ground for you to leave tracks, because when you get up north, you don't have the right clothing to survive in those cold temperatures. Okay? Also, birds hatch. The first quail calls, birds hatch in the spring. The second verse talks about dead trees. Now, the legend says that Peg Leg Joe, who was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, would carve or mark his symbol, which was a left foot and a peg foot. He'd lost his leg in a sea accident somehow. He would carve that symbol on dead trees as a reminder, you're going in the right direction. So, the river bank makes a very good road. The dead trees will show you the way. Left foot, peg foot, traveling on. Follow the drinking gourd. And so on. And so the visual references in this song or to help the slaves find their way. But there was another, even more clever symbol. Back in those days, you didn't have heat in your house. You had a fireplace in the kitchen for cooking, but the other rooms usually didn't have fireplaces unless you were very wealthy and you could afford them. So what did you use to keep warm at night? You used quilts. Everybody had quilts. They were decorative, they were pretty, they were easy to make, and everybody used them. Now, I have a picture of a quilt, and as you can see, a quilt would have a pattern, a theme pattern. In this case, it's an 8-pointed star. And you would make several squares of this, and then you would stitch them all together, and this quilt was big enough to cover a whole adult. So quilts were big. And they were a great source of pride for the people who made them. And some of the quilts were just decorative. They didn't have any meaning at all. They just looked pretty, like this one. But then there was a whole system of quilts used in the stations, used in the safe houses, and used along the Underground Railroad. Let me introduce you to some. If you saw a quilt with several squares of this log cabin hanging out to dry, and everybody hung their quilts out in the morning to let them air out, they either hung them out their windows or they held them on a clothesline stretched between two trees. If you saw this quilt with the log cabin pattern, that was a safe house. That was a place where you were welcome to come, to rest, to eat, and to get ready for the next part of your journey. Another quilt, and a lot of conductors had this pattern. This was the shoe fly quilt. And a shoe fly was a pesky fly, but it could fly. It could fly to freedom. And so again, on the Underground Railroad, quilts having this pattern were symbols. It's safe to come here. It's safe to be at my house. Boys and girls, do you remember when I showed you the visual diagram of the safe houses and how you never followed the same path and you would zigzag because you didn't want to be predictable because the bounty hunters could find you? And I told you that that was part of an African belief, tradition, that evil travels in a straight line. Well, this is a quilt pattern, and it's called the drunkard's path. Now, people who get drunk are notorious for not being able to walk a straight line. But this was a reminder, don't travel in a straight line, but also if you saw this quilt at a house, again, it would reassure you, this is a safe house. You are welcome to hide here and rest. And imagine, these were hanging right out in the open, and nobody figured out what they were. Another quilt was a warning, and that quilt happened to be, if I can find it here. Oh, the bear's paw pattern. The bear's paw pattern was a warning. You know, bounty hunters were out everywhere looking for escaped slaves. And so if word got to the safe house owners, they would hang the bear's paw quilt out as a warning. Don't come here. Hide in the woods where the bears are until we hang a different quilt telling you that it's safe to come in. In fact, on the Underground Railroad, they even had a secret phrase to warn conductors and station masters that there was a problem. If there were bounty hunters in the area, the phrase was, "The wind comes from the south today." meaning the bounty hunters were coming from the south looking to try to capture runaway slaves and take them back. Now, one of my favorite and most ingenious quilts was one that actually gave directions. And it was called the Flying Geese pattern. And about 15 years ago, one of my wonderful students actually made this for me. And it is a quilt square. Now again, imagine you'd have to have about 12 of these in order to make up a full quilt. But if you look at this quilt square, it's actually telling you what direction to travel. Can you look at it very carefully and figure out, are you supposed to go north, east, south, or west? Did you figure it out? Okay, look carefully at the patterns. Do you see that 3 of the patterns have the same color? Black and white. They all have patterns too, but the blue ones, different color and solid. So which direction is this telling you to travel? I believe it's telling you to travel east to the next safe house. But the beauty of this pattern is, if the message to the slaves was go north, all you had to do was turn the quilt around. Or sometimes you had to travel backwards to escape capture. So again, all you do is turn it around. Something so low tech, and yet something so incredibly effective. And again, nobody ever caught on. So let's go back and let's sing Follow the Drinking Gourd. And I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about this intricate and fascinating idea of the Underground Railroad. Because next lesson, we're going to go through all of the coded special titles that were used to designate what the jobs were on this network that freed 100,000 people from a terrible situation. So could you please join me for Follow the Drinking Gourd? Here we go. Again, we'll make this like a sandwich. We'll start with the refrain, we'll do the 4 verses, and we'll end with the refrain. Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is waiting for to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. When the sun comes back and the first quail calls, follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is waiting for to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. The river bank makes a very good road, the dead trees will show you the way. Left foot, pig foot, traveling on, follow the drinking gourd. The river ends between 2 hills, which is the Alabama River. Follow the drinking gourd. There's another river on the other side, the Tennessee. Follow the drinking gourd. When the great big river meets the little river, that's the Ohio. Follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is waiting for to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. And refrain. Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is waiting for to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. A beautiful set of coded directions and times for escape on the Underground Railroad. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time.